Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. We are here for a short presentation and talk about a special celebration. We are here for a double celebration for Italian comics. This year is the year where in Italy we celebrated the born of the main and the most important weekly about comics in Italy, born 100 years ago in Milano as a supplement of the daily newspaper Corriere della Sera. So the same year, 100 years ago, was the year when Gianluigi Bonelli was born in Milan. Gianluigi Bonelli, creator of Tex Willer, the oldest Italian comic series. Thanks to this double anniversary, in Italy a large group of publishers, university, festivals and cultural institutions created together a special celebrating committee that developed, financed and co-create exhibitions, publications, events about 100 years of Italian comics. So this presence of a collective stand of Italian comics in Frankfurt Book Messe is just a way to promote the idea in such an important venue for publishing, for the publishing world. The idea that Italian comics are old enough, for example, 100 and more of years of history, but Italian comics are also one of the most vivid country that still produce comics and exports products, creators and publishers all over the world. So the idea of being here for a short presentation about that double anniversary is a short talk with two of the main protagonists of the current comics publishing industry in Italy. One is Alfredo Castelli, author of most of the Bonelli comics and creator of one of the most internationally known series, that's Martin Mystère, and Marco Lupoi, that is publishing director of an Italian publisher named Panini Comics, that works in Italy and, as I think many of you know, works internationally in Europe and Latin America and in Germany as the final and most obvious detail. So the idea of this short talk is to first asking Alfredo Castelli and Marco Lupoi to give us some details about the Italian comics market today. So the first question that I want to tell you is, how can you describe the identity and specificity of Italian comics market today?
Well, the Italian comics market, I think, has a special dimension that is pretty unique in the fact that it's a market that is almost exclusively centered on newsagents, on kiosks, on newsstands. This is also common here in Germany and in many other countries, but nowhere like in Italy the kiosk is so ever-present and such a big part of the sales. So the amount of titles, the space dedicated to comics, and just the sheer amount of comics sold in newsstand is pretty unique. I think the only other country where newsstands have such a big portion of the sale could be Brazil, where comics are sold almost exclusively in newsagents. And then there is a very small presence in bookstores, much smaller than in Germany, for example, and much smaller than in France. And the other peculiarity, if you want, is that there is quite a big comic book shop market, but that's not so uncommon. That's present in a few other countries. but I would say that the specificity is the newsstand.
Yes, and differently from Brazil, we have in Italy 38,000 newsstands. That's incredible. Every place in Italy has a new one or more newsstands which sell comics. This means a kind of miracle, of distribution miracle, because everybody can get comics, but also a kind of terrible moloch to which sacrifice, because if you want to distribute a comic everywhere, you must have a great pre-trans. They cost very much, and probably this is the reason why Italy developed a line, many lines of very popular comics, very comics which are not so expensive, which now are very well done, I think, but that were targeted at the beginning to a very large, very important part of public, because they have to sell much just to survive. And this is still a characteristic of the mainstream Italian market.
Yeah, I think that you are right. I think that Italian comics are probably the cheapest in the world.
Sure.
I think only in Japan, in the sense of price. Only in Japan, I think that there is a tendency to price everything very low. So also in Japan, the cost of a manga is maybe 3 euros, and also in Italy, the cost of a comic is 3 euros, 4 euros. I mean,
yes, still less.
Or less.
Typically, Bonelli comics cost 3 euros.
3 euros, and they are very thick comics, which read like a novel. That's another characteristic of Italian comics. Long stories.
Yeah.
They are the heirs of Roman.
Yeah, I also think this is another characteristic. Italian comics are very long. The idea of a thin comic of 24 pages or 32 pages, like in a lot of other countries, is unthinkable. Even when we work with American comics in Italian, and we put a lot of different issues together to have 72, 80 pages or 100 pages, just because the whole idea is that when you buy a comic, you have to get a lot of pages.
And the characteristics of characters are the same characteristics of the in our times of the characters of popular literature, of feuilleton, of French feuilleton, of German romanefte, I think it's called, of so long stories with many interlocking stories, many characters, well-detailed characters, and so on. Let's say that Italian comics maybe are the last heir of European popular novels.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, the typical Italian comics have at least 100 pages, and they feel like a little short novel. So if you want, they're similar to Japanese manga, which also feels like a novel. So the idea of a popular comic that is quite, broad in scope and with a dimension of reading that is fairly long.
But what about the identity of Italian comics that influenced or that led traces in international comics products or in international comics styles? What's Italian heritage in the comics publishing industry worldwide?
Well, maybe.
No, go ahead.
Maybe we did not leave a big trace in the sense of formats, like American comic books were translated and the format of American comic book was copied, was diffused in many countries. So the format of French album and so on. The typical format, and maybe also the manga. The typical format of Italian comics is not so widely known, but we had our influence on the other market are our artists. So the Argentinian market, South American market, developed most of all by means of Italian authors. the English market.
Yeah. The English market in the 60s was fueled by Italian studios and also Spanish studios, but a lot of Italian studios.
Tons of Italian
who were creating war stories or other romance stories for the British market. So yeah, I think that Italian...
Excuse me, but the conference speaks of the title of Hugo Pratt, I think so. Pratt, for instance, did pages and pages both for the English market and
the Argentinian market and the French market.
The French market, sure.
Yeah, I think that Italian creators, more than Italian comics going outside of Italy, I think that Italian creators have developed comics in France, now in America. There are a lot of Italian creators working for the big American studios. Italian creators have worked in England. And so I think it's more our creators going out. The only exception, which is if you want something that's not so visible, is Disney, because the Italian Disney school has really been one of the most important, and now Disney Italia is the biggest creator of original Disney comics. And if you want, the Italian Disney style has colonized the world and is present all over the world. But that is a very specific case. I think that only a few Italian creators have succeeded in being published outside of Italy, like Pratt, like Milo Manara. By the way, I have to do the compulsory advertising because the whole works of Milo Manara are now being reprinted in Germany by Panini, so check them out. They're just out this month, or last month. And so Milo Manara, Vittorio Giardino, and Crepax and Pratt, but not in a very widespread, not so much.
Not so many. Panini also invented a very important thing of which you speak some moment. The only format which has been, which now is internationally popular. Internationally, I mean all the world over, but later.
Because what is really evident is Italian typical format of comic books is not very common worldwide.
Not at all.
Special format.
Yeah, and there is another thing that's very peculiar to Italian publishing, that our comics are one of the very few examples of comics which are paid just by selling the comics. No need of licensing and merchandising and so on. There are not so many publishers who can live just selling their comics in their country. Italy has this kind of speciality. We have foreign translation, but our comics are so specific and so typical that they are not sold so much outside. And we have licensing, we have merchandising, we have also television series, film and so on, but it's not the main point of interest.
Yeah, I think the Italian typical format of 100 black and white pages is typical Italian. I think that it has been exported, but only maybe in Brazil.
In Brazil, in the States, where there are not, where specific formats have not yet been invented. So we say the Balkans, we say possibly East
Turkey,
Europe, Greece, and so on. They sell very little and pay rights in yogurt and because they are not big markets. But this is the beginning. No, maybe this the way to spread this kind of product. Also Germany has published. In Germany, many years ago, a typical Italian format was used and was popular. I think that nobody remembers, a few remembers it, because it was just after the war. It was called the piccolo format in German, piccolo with the word piccolo in Italian, klein format, and it was the shape, books at the shape of a strip, and published mainly Italian characters, which were published in this small format just because of the paper shortage after the war. Panini Comics, I think, is now in Germany. There is Panini Verlag, one of the big ones. I think that Italian artists have worked a lot for German institutions like Rolf Kauka. Rolf Kauka, Fiction Foxy, has been drawn especially by artists living in Italy, and also many comics published by Bastai Verlag were drawn in Rome by Studio Giolitti. And I myself wrote a series which was much more popular in Germany for Zack. It was called The Gentleman Gambeash. And I wrote it for years for Germany direct.
Gli aristocratici.
Aristocratici.
Yes. What about today most exported Italian comics? Today, which kind of Italian comics are the most successful all over the world? Because you mentioned artists as Pratt and Manara, maybe on the
GP, for example, maybe GP and Mattotti are very popular. I mean, a lot of Italian artists have become very popular in France, to the point that many French readers think that they are French. They don't perceive them as being Italian.
I am not French, but I perceive them as French artists because the main publisher is French. Their works are published before
in France,
and then elsewhere, and so on. Let's say that of the call it Italian product,
maybe Disney comics and the new generation of Disney comics.
Wings
together.
Wings is a perfect example. It's one of the rare examples of an Italian comic made 100% in Italy by a local Italian company that is now published in maybe 20 languages and is all over the place. Disney, as we were saying, most of the Disney comics worldwide are made in Italy. So those maybe are the most visible Disney Italian comics. Then of course there is some of the Bonelli comics are published. I say that Milo Manara is very much international. He's published in maybe 15 different languages.
Yes.
And I think also Vittorio Giardino, maybe a bit less, but still.
Surely Manara is the top seller, and possibly Pratt too.
Pratt.
Still a lot.
But for example, there are some of the big geniuses of Italian comics, like Andrea Pazienza or Magnus or Jacovitti, who have Jacovitti was appearing up there before, who have had barely any exposure outside of Italy, something in France, but they have really not traveled.
That's true. And Italy has also a production. We spoke of mainstream production, but there is a rich production of non-mainstream comics.
Underground?
Not underground, but artistically interesting comics, which maybe are sold more than mainstream.
GP is a good example, yeah.
You said Mattotti.
Yes.
Mattotti began drawing small things in Italy and so on. So the market, I must say that a very variegated market. It's a market in search of a new dimension because many things have changed in the world of comics everywhere. So everybody of us is looking for new ways. As about the new way, excuse me, the only format which was
it was mentioning before that there is one format which comes from Italy, which has been comics sold with newspapers, because Panini in 2003 started this idea of selling, comics with newspapers. This is the last collection which we are doing in Italy with Corriere della Sera.
The same title of the...
Yeah, it's a collection dedicated to 100 years of Italian comics. But Panini has produced maybe 400 different graphic novels with Italian newspapers, and this format has traveled worldwide. There have been 2 collections in Germany, one with Bild and one with Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, which actually we produced, and which sort of came out of this whole program. And we've done these programs in Spain, in Portugal, in France, in Chile. But nowhere like in Italy, in Argentina, yes.
Which kind of comics were published in this daily newspapers collection.
We started this with what we call anthological series, in which every week there was a different book with a different creator or a different character. Then there have been maybe 3 series like that. Then there have been a lot of monographic series done by us, but also by other companies, several Disney ones. There's a Bonelli one with text that's been going on for like 100 issues.
Yes.
And basically every week there's a different graphic novel sold with a newspaper.
But also national productions. The Argentinian series, for instance, had a lot of
Argentinian
creator. In Germany too, the Build production made, I think, Kauka, Nick Natterton, and other German
a lot of German strips, yes.
So every country has its own characters. But the whole idea was launched by Italy, let's say by Panini, maybe by Lupo, I don't know. But it's an Italian idea. And in one of the rare Italian formats.
Yes, it's true. Something that came from us, and now it's being done everywhere. There have been a lot of series in Portugal, everywhere. It's still in Italy. In any given week, there are at least 2 to 3 different graphic novels that are sold with newspapers.
And that's interesting for a specific reason, market reason, because it creates a new market of people who usually don't
buy comics. Yeah.
So people maybe snobs comics, as we say, you know? Maybe if they are sold with Corriere della Sera, which is one of the most important newspaper in Italy, or Repubblica, well, think, but maybe if they are guaranteed by such names, maybe I can read them. And this open a small door on another kind of public.
Yes, because there are always, the 2 big Italian newspapers are always competing with each other with this series. So.
Just a little detail on your experience with this comics market, because I remember you were translated into Germany, you work with a Panini branch in Germany. What's different in translating or adapting Italian comics as your works or Manara works in Germany? There is any specificity or any specific work you did on selling your products in Germany?
Well, to tell the truth, I did not sell, my products were not sold so much in Germany. Years ago they published a series. In Italy I write a series which is, let's say, popular, and this works since 28 years. It's called Martin Mister. In Germany it has been released as an animated cartoon by ProSieben, I think, I don't remember, some year ago. And it has been published as a comic in the 80s with another title that was Alan Dark. Alan Dark because Dark is the pseudonym of the author of a very popular romanefte in Germany, that's John Sinclair, Gastjäger, something like this. Okay, so they simulated that it was some relative film. It's just sold the 6th issue, I think, and Pastai Verlag, I think, that risked bankruptcy for this. Then later, with Zack, I wrote this series, the Gentleman Gambash, which worked well. We worked international, and I was satisfied. Not so much, not more much.
Well, it's a different situation in the sense that Panini in Germany is a German publisher, and we publish American and Japanese comics, so not really Italian comics. So I can compare the German market to the Italian market in other dimensions, for example, manga or or American comics, Germany and Italy have something in common, that both countries have a very well developed what is called direct market, a market of comic book stores. In Europe, the only four countries that have a really solid distribution like that are Italy, Spain, Germany and the UK. But the two biggest ones are Italy and Germany for the amount of points of sale, the efficiency of the system, and also the amount of copies that can be reached.
Also because comics are not so sold in the normal library, in normal bookstores.
No, in Germany they are.
Yeah,
In Germany they are. In Italy they aren't.
They are. So in Italy they are, but not so much.
Not so much.
And in Germany also, I think there is a...
I think that in German bookstores there's quite a big segment, much bigger than in Italy. You have to think, for example, that something like Asterix, which in Italy is absolutely not a success,
Asterix,
I think sells more in Germany than in
used
France.
to sell a Hapa Verlag, I remember. Used to
It's
sell
a huge success.
So much more than France.
Yeah. So they have this. So it's interesting because the German comics are produced in Stuttgart, but coordinated also from my office in Italy. So every time we decide on something, there is always the perception of the difference between what is successful here and what is successful in Italy or in France. So it's very interesting because the taste of German readers and the taste of the other European readers for licensed comics are not so similar. Well, apart from Naruto and a few other things, there's quite a few changes. I think the only Italian comic which we're publishing now is Manara, and which just came out, and from the first indications it's doing really well. Also because it's quite a good price in respect to the traditional high-end that was published, so we're very happy. But and of course we'll have probably some more Italian comics next year, including, if you want, Milo Manara's X-Men, which is an American comic written by an American, produced by Panini with an Italian creator, and published everywhere next year.
So I think we can thank you, and we can suggest you to, if you want to get a look and touch some Bonelli comics or Panini comics, or also some Alfredo Castelli comics.